Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and today we have a story going clear back to 1899, but it has some parallels with modern day abortion practice and some serious deviations from modern medicine. Um, Cora Burke was a 20-year-old widow who lived with her parents and 4-year-old son in Idaho. She'd been widowed for about 5 months and had recently become engaged to marry. In May of 1899, Cora told Mrs. Martha Johnson that she was about 6 weeks pregnant and wanted to find a good doctor to perform an abortion. And if you read Nancy Howell Lee's excellent book, The Search for an Abortionist, this was typically what women did. Back before you could go in the yellow pages or online and just look up abortion clinics, they'd ask a friend. Mrs. Johnson introduced Cora to Dr. Robert R.J. Alcorn, who had been practicing medicine for a short time in the area. Dr. Alcorn was living in the boarding house Mrs. Johnson operated with a Mr. A.G. Abbey. So Cora went to Alcorn's room about 2 days after they were introduced. Mr. Abbey listened from an adjoining room and heard Cora telling Dr. Alcorn that the instrument he was using was hurting her. Then on the night of Tuesday, June 21st, Dr. Alcorn asked Mr. T.J. Rundle to help him carry a table into his office, which was at the back of a drugstore in the town of Harrison. Okay, so this is at night. Now, you have to understand, surgery on a table is totally shocking to us nowadays, but it wasn't tremendously shocking at the time. It was fairly normal to perform surgery on a table, whether it was a doctor's house or the person's house. If you read the book Cheaper by the Dozen, all of the kids had tonsillectomies performed in their dad's library. I believe it was on the desk. I have a 1920s obstetrical nursing book that teaches the nurse how to set up a table in the woman's kitchen for an emergency C-section. So table surgery, on an ordinary table is something that's appalling to us in the 21st century, but in 1899 that was pretty much standard. You just did the surgery wherever it was handy. Okay, but Rundle's curiosity was piqued, and he asked Alcorn if he was going to dissect a stiff. Alcorn told him no, he was going to perform an operation on somebody from across the river. Rundle decided to snoop, so he returned at about 10 p.m. and saw Cora go through the drugstore into Alcorn's office. Then Rundle slipped around to the back of the house, where he could peer into Alcorn's office around an ill-hung window blind. The following is what Rundle said he observed. Alcorn stood beside the chair where Cora was sitting, supporting her head with one hand. He had a small vial containing a dark liquid and was holding a cloth to Cora's face. Cora seemed to fall into a deep sleep, whereupon Alcorn picked her up and lay her on the table. Alcorn removed Cora's undergarments and positioned her for surgery. He examined her internally, inserted a speculum, then inserted a probe about a foot long into her body. And that was standard abortion practice, not just at the time, but up until now. They still use a dilator to open the cervix enough to get the soft cannula in. Inserted a probe about a foot long into her body, causing a flow of blood, which he blotted up with a cloth. From time to time, Alcorn applied the cloth to the dark cloth to Cora's face again. The entire procedure took about an hour and a half. And interesting, this administering anesthesia all by yourself or with nobody trained to do it still happens. That's how some women die. Joe Bills Reynolds had his janitor administering anesthesia. Hanan Rotem had his receptionist. So, this would have been normal at the time for the doctor to be doing his own anesthesia, but as normal as it was then, it's not normal now, except among abortionists. Okay. So, Cora was awakened. Alcorn helped her set her clothing to rights and sent her on her way. So at about 4 p.m. the next day, Alcorn was called in to tend to Cora, who was in a lot of pain. He examined her and found her uterus to be inflamed and bleeding. He prescribed ergot to be, please tell me how to pronounce that, E-R-G-O-T. common abortifacient, to be given 1/2 teaspoon each half hour for 3 doses, and then every hour afterward for 18 hours. Cora's mother asked Alcorn about her daughter's condition, and he told her, "She caught a bad cold. She does not flow enough when she has her monthlies. I will give her something to make her flow." Now, this reassuring the family that everything's fine when the woman is dying is something we still see in safe and legal abortion deaths. The loved one is sitting out in the waiting room wondering what's taking so long, and the staff are, no, everything's fine, everything's fine. At about 6 p.m. on the 21st, William Catcham called Alcorn to visit Mrs. Catcham, but Alcorn told him, "Well, I don't know, I'm expecting a miscarriage here any minute. I can go over there and come back. It does not make any difference to them." So this is indicating that he was evidently waiting for Cora to expel a dead baby. He went to Ketchum's house and attended to his wife. So over the ensuing days, Alcorn visited Cora 5 times. The last time was about 2 hours before she died on Friday afternoon, June 23rd. Her feet and hands were cold, her fingers blue, her lips purple. Alcorn told Cora's mother she was doing well and would be up soon. Again, this is something I've seen frequently with safe and legal abortion deaths. The woman is clearly in bad shape, and the doctor's like, "No problem." So Alcorn immediately took a train to Washington State. So it seems like he's fleeing, but he returned 10 o'clock the following Sunday morning, and then fled again, this time to Montana, where he was found, and the sheriff went and got him. Now, while Cora was ill, she passed a lot of blood and clots. Mrs. Knight, who visited Cora during her illness, testified, "I helped dress her after she was dead. Her clothing and bedclothing were saturated with blood. A quilt was doubled up under her 4 thickness, and it was clear through the quilt. It was clots of blood. I observed an odor in connection with it. There was too great a quantity to have come from ordinary menstruation, much greater in quantity." And this massive amount of bleeding is, again, something that I've seen in abortion deaths. Tamia Russell saturated a mattress. Jennifer Sudduth was bleeding through blankets and sweatpants. The sheriff testified about the conversation he'd had with Alcorn when he was bringing him back on the train. "He told me that he never had anything to do with this girl, Cora Burke, that he began in the daytime an operation on a man for stricture and did not complete it, and then he took him in the back room of the drugstore and completed the operation in the evening." So he's saying that Rundle's claim that Alcorn was performing an abortion on Cora that night wasn't true. He was performing an operation on a man for a stricture. So he gave me this statement after I'd warned him not to make any statement to me. Now, during the trial, Alcorn testified in his own behalf, saying that Cora had attempted to do an abortion on herself with a hair dart, which had punctured the wall of her uterus and broken off, leaving about 1.5 inches. And Alcorn said he'd used a speculum and piston syringe to remove the foreign body. So first, no, I wasn't operating on her at all. I was operating on a man. Oh, yeah, I was, but I was removing this foreign body from a self-induced abortion. Now, physicians called as experts on the case all agreed that Cora had died of septicemia or blood poisoning, and they agreed that the ergo itself would not be enough to cause an abortion. Now, Alcorn's defense also raised the possibility that Cora hadn't actually been pregnant. But the court concluded that Cora believed herself to be pregnant, sought an abortion, and had undergone a procedure intended to cause an abortion, which was enough to demonstrate that the defendant did intend to kill a fetus, especially in light of Alcorn's statement that he was expecting a patient to miscarry. So again, Alcorn had been charged with murder. His first trial ended in a hung jury. The second jury found him guilty of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 7 years in the penitentiary. And Alcorn appealed, partially on the grounds that since the indictment did not specifically say that the abortion took place in 1899, it did not accuse him of performing an act that caused death within a year and a day. So if you follow the link below to my blog post about it, I do have a link to the court documents regarding this case. Again, we see some parallels to modern abortion practice, though not modern medical practice. And we do see the difference between medical practice then and common medical practice now. And, you know, this was an abortion performed by a doctor. I don't think anything would have been done differently if abortion had been legal. But for some reason, pro-choice people just assume that the illegality and not all surgery has risks is what caused Cora's death.